The Sinclair broadcast group, which is owned by a right-wing media mogul, seems to be working hard to push dubious claims about President Biden's mental fitness for office. And they're pushing it to millions of Americans. Aaron Rupar of Public Notice and Judd Legum of Popular Information highlighted how Sinclair has aggressively worked the claims about Biden's age into dozens of local broadcasts across the country. The stations aired a segment that repackaged a widely criticized Wall Street Journal article that questions Biden's acuity. Local anchors all introduced the segment with a nearly identical script on how the president's mental awareness will affect the upcoming election. Here are just some of them.
The Wall Street Journal calling into question the mental fitness of President Joe Biden. As national correspondent Matt Gelka tells us, the issue could decide the election.
Wall Street Journal has published a story which calls the mental fitness of President Biden into question. As national correspondent Matt Gelka tells us, the issue could be an election decider.
Should he be on that or any ballot? The Wall Street Journal is out with new reporting calling into question the mental fitness of President Joe Biden. As national correspondent Matt Gelka tells us, the issue could be an election decider.
As the Wall Street Journal is out with reporting calling into question the mental fitness of President Biden. We want to know, are you worried about President Biden's mental fitness? As national correspondent Matt Gelka tells us, the issue could be an election decider.
As the Wall Street Journal is out with new reporting calling into question the mental fitness of President Joe Biden.
And as national correspondent Matt Gelka tells us, the issue could be an election decider.
I mean, and Willie, the issue here is, of course, local news. I think people trust local news more than they trust national news because they know those news anchors, but it's actually not local reporting. It's spoon-fed from a right-wing leadership group that's spreading disinformation, and it's I guess it's just a sign of the times. But again, we talk about pushing back on disinformation. It's pretty tough when that disinformation is coming from local news networks whose bosses willingly want them to spread lies.
Yeah, and local news anchors, local newspapers, people trust them. They live in their communities. They're on their TVs every day. And Sinclair owns, I think, almost 200 stations. And as you could probably see there by some of the logos, those were Fox, yes, but also ABC, CBS, NBC. These are stations that people have on in their living rooms all the time. And it's not unusual for a network to feed to their affiliates national coverage so that they don't all have reporters in Washington and New York. But what is a little unusual here, Jonathan Lemire, is the narrative being pushed so specifically about a piece from another, not from Sinclair, but from a Murdoch-owned entity in the Wall Street Journal about Joe Biden, pushing the story that, as we have sort of dissembled over the last couple of weeks, is filled with problems.
Yeah, and Sinclair has become a rising force in media over the last couple of presidential cycles. As you say, a couple hundred stations there. Polls suggest that Americans trust local news more than national news. So this probably has an impact. And we saw a little bit of this in 2020. The Biden campaign tried to flag moments like this. They're certainly doing it again now, amplifying the good work here done by the reporters who identified this trend. It's something that also just points to on the right, beyond Sinclair, it includes Fox News and other Murdoch organizations, and even those further to the right. They're much more so marching in lockstep and sort of touting the party line and agreeing on certain talking points, much more so than other what we call more mainstream media or even some of the more liberal media organizations that are out there. And it is something that in a moment where such a fractured media ecosystem does make a difference. And both campaigns are having challenges with this, that just, with fewer eyeballs on what we'd consider traditional media, more and more people getting their media in other sources, including their phones, it's just hard to break through. But it does seem like that Wall Street Journal reporting, with all of its flaws, is one of those stories that did.
And they stand by it, the Wall Street Journal.
They know it's a lie.
But
I mean, Willie, it's a crazy thing about it. They know it's a lie. And how do we know they know it's a lie? Because they have the Kevin McCarthy quotes from the actual meeting at the White House that supposedly McCarthy later said showed that he was in a haze. They have the quotes from people around Kevin McCarthy who said, yeah, McCarthy would say that Biden was bonkers publicly, but then quietly would whisper to us privately what an effective negotiator he was. That was reported in Politico. That was reported in mainstream publications before the Wall Street Journal piece. They know they were spreading a lie at the Wall Street Journal. Those editors knew it. The reporters knew it. They did it anyway. And the only guess I can have is that it came from above. In fact, outside the Wall Street Journal newsroom. That is the only way to justify that story. When you had, as I've said before,
that's a guess.
As I've said before on this show, you have the Wall Street Journal that's actually been going under new leadership, I think, in a really great direction. So that's just like, which of these don't fit? That story doesn't fit. And there are few explanations other than it came from above, and they were told they had to put it in.
Whoever put it in, it's certainly had the desired effect, which is a couple of weeks of coverage. Now it feeds up, as we just saw, the ecosystem feeds into Sinclair, gives them something to talk about. They can kind of use that as their way of telling a story of what they say is Joe Biden's decline. We've heard from Democrats in the last week or so who said they spoke to the Wall Street Journal for that piece and that their views and their quotes were not included in that. So there's been a lot here. Now, the fact of the matter is, there are a lot of people in this country, even Democrats, and we know privately, who express concerns about Joe Biden's age. But you can express that and report that in a more direct and, shall we say, honest way than it was presented there.
In context. In context to the opponent and his behavior and his fitness.
Right.
I mean, that would be fair, especially given the Shark Battery speech that happened at the time. I mean, around the same time. There's a story to be done there about Trump's fitness.
Hannibal Lecter.
I mean, there's so many stories to be done there. And yet,
President Obama.
the Wall Street Journal seems to be inured to it. So coming up, more and more young women